Welcome to another show of the Research to Reps Roundtable. I am your co-host, Pat Ivey, and with me are my co-hosts, Dr. Ted Lambrinidis and Dr. Ernie Reimer. But first up, Ted, I want to know, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Down in Texas, making some stops this week, so enjoying the heat down here.
Oh yeah. I think there's
Doing
a little bit
great.
of heat everywhere.
Looking forward to exchange between two Dr. Patricks today.
We'll see how that goes. Dr. Reimer, what's happening? Ernie, what's going on?
Just gearing up for this exciting podcast this afternoon. And I'm with you, Dr. Ted. We have Dr. Patrick Ivey and we have Dr. Patrick Ward. So it's kind of like Dr. Patrick squared. And so that means that this thing's going to get pretty geeky today. Patrick, how are you doing today?
Which Patrick are you talking to?
That would be you, Dr. Patrick Ward.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I'm good. Just as I told you guys before we jumped on the call, just kind of getting back into the swing of preparing for the start of another season, which will be next week. Players report on Tuesday. So we'll do physicals and testing and all that stuff. And then Wednesday will be the first practice, and we're straight out the gate, about 5 weeks of training camp, and then into the season.
Now, Patrick, from the time you started work with the Seahawks to this season, what have you seen as the biggest changes in your role?
Well, when I started, I was primarily hired just sports science analyst, like basically, looking at sensor data, accelerometers and things like that. And then that slowly kind of kept progressing into doing analysis into other football operations projects and things like that. So, it kind of went from analyzing sensor data, trying to, as best we could, build prognostic models and things like that around player health, performance. And then it kind of morphed into being involved with draft process and player analysis and game analysis and in-game tracking data analysis and all those kinds of things. So just kind of, I guess it started out very like training physiology related, and now it's more broad reaching across aspects of sports. So, yeah.
I'll ask a question here. This is to Patrick. So I'm going to shed some light on Ernie. Okay. So there are people. So Ernie's the director of sports science, and there are people who don't know what Ernie does. Do people know what you do? And first of all, explain what you think it is that you do, and then what you think other people think that you do.
Well, I do know what Ernie does, but as far as what I do, for me in my role, it's really about overseeing our research strategy within football operations. And so that's everything from opponent analysis to prepping for game day and building reports and analysis for the coaches, down to like player evaluation stuff and scouting and player acquisition stuff for the front office, and then down to the actual applied physiology, applied sports science type of stuff for strength staff and medical staff and nutrition, things like that. So for me, it's really trying to look across that landscape, identify where the bottlenecks are, identify where the key projects are that are going to be our biggest bang for kind of the buck, and then make sure that I have the right people working on those projects and working on that analysis, or working on engineering data sets, or working on building, front end applications and things like that. As far as what people think I do, I don't know. I mean, sometimes I think they think I just probably turn on GPS or force plates and print reports, of which I don't. I actually don't even really do anymore. I mean, there's always someone else collecting force plate and GPS data. I have built web apps and the analysis that run on the back end of those things. But I think probably most people think it's I guess the nicest way I could say it, and maybe this is what people also think Ernie does at Louisville, is they probably think I'm more of a sports technologist than I am like an actual scientist trying to think about, philosophy of science and how do we apply scientific processes to answer relevant questions. So that's probably the where the disconnect is, I guess I would say. I don't know,
Okay.
Ernie, you could probably weigh in and say what people think you do.
Yeah. I think it's well put. I mean, if I'm understanding your description, I mean, I find it really fascinating how you have started out in kind of the health and performance sphere as a sports science analysis, as you stated earlier, and now you're doing these other projects and applying these scientific skill sets and research applications to things that go beyond health and performance. So that's quite fascinating to me. But I agree. I mean, we are doing a good job at our institution to start to tear down, I suppose, the stereotype of what a sports scientist is. I remember in one of my first meetings with a head coach who didn't have wearable technology, they said, well, we don't have catapult for our team, so I'm not exactly sure, like, why we're having this conversation right now. I mean, that was like a real thing that someone said to me in my first meeting with them, and I had several other interactions like that with some different staff, and a lot of times what sports science narrows into in others' eyes would be technology, analysis, and reporting. And I feel like we as an industry in the United States, sports science is still kind of an emerging profession in a way in the United States, even though all of our health and performance professionals kind of pass the big science test to get their certifications, but we are an emerging profession. And it's up to us as this new budding profession of sports science to help people understand that technology is a tool for collecting data, usually, and analysis is a part of the scientific method, and reporting or communication of results is a part of the scientific method. But the scientific method is more than just those three steps. I'd say that those three steps are critical skill sets of a sports scientist, but the scientific method is much broader than that. But on the topic of scientific method, I got the opportunity and the privilege to listen to you present recently and at Notre Dame. And you talked about a method that really caught my attention that seems like the scientific method. It kind of operates the same way. And I believe that was a PDAC.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really fascinating because it's the first time someone from like a sports science or a research background came in and kind of presented like a new model on how you start with a problem and come to the conclusions or the results. Would you talk about and maybe just give us a quick breakdown on what that is and share a little bit with us?
Yeah, it's so PPDAC, problem, plan, data, analysis, and conclusion. And it comes from the statistical literature. It's not the only framework out there for kind of conducting analysis. In business world, they have the CRISP-DM framework. There's other frameworks that people use. This one just resonated with me because I think it came from the statistical literature. And it's just a, to me, I think it's really easy, especially as you put it, where, people think about the technology first sometimes. And what gets tagged along with that is this idea of, well, just collect the data and something will be in there. And you end up wasting a lot of time poking around through things and hoping to find something, or going through what statistician Andrew Gelman would call the garden of forking paths. And you have all these researcher degrees of freedom. And we're just wasting a lot of time and also a lot of money. If you're in a situation where you're not well resourced, like the last thing you want to do is spend money on technology in the hopes to find something. So always starting with the problem in question and then working from there in terms of, what kind of technology or what kind of data collection or data will I need in order to answer this question? And what can I realistically do within my ecological environment? So the PPDAC framework is just a framework for us to kind of conduct business and conduct work. The other thing it does is it really helps us bring in the practitioners to the fold. So instead of them just asking us like Charlie Brown, like they go up to Lucy's little lemonade stand, or like give the peace of mind. You ask the question and then she just gives you an answer. That's sometimes how they practitioners will treat a sports science department. This allows them to sort of see how the sausage is made a bit. And at each one of the stops on that PPDAC cycle, you can bring a practitioner in and say, look, this is where we're at. Do you have any thoughts around this? And by encouraging their dialogue, it allows them to be a part of the research process, which ultimately allows them to hopefully buy in at the end of it and feel like they're more a part of it. But I think that's the thing. It's to me, it's all about questions. I think people often start with technology, like the story you shared about the coach who said, well, I don't have Catapult. We don't have money for that. So I don't know how we're having this conversation, is not very different from a conversation I had with someone at the NSCA National Conference coming out of the sports science special interest group meeting. Was like, well, I'm at this school and we don't have any money. So there's nothing I can do. I might have $4,000 of budget a year. And I'm like, well, you're at a small school. Yeah, but like, that's a pretty decent amount of money. And he's like, well, what would I teach my students with $4,000 a year? Like, I can't buy Catapult. I can't buy force plates. They're yearly subscriptions. And I'm like, well, I don't like yearly subscriptions any more than anybody else. But I was like, for $50, you can get like Raspberry Pi accelerometers and 40 lines of Python code. And all of a sudden you're teaching students about signal processing and it costs you $40. Google Sheets is free. And now you're measuring the psychobiological state and you can get a $20 polar heart rate. And now you're measuring a physiological state. And I saved you some money to have coffee every week this year as well. So with $4,000, you can do a lot. And it's sometimes about, being resourceful and working within your constraints. And it's like actually you guys presented, Pat and Ernie on this at Notre Dame, is sometimes we have to think outside of our four walls and think about how we're going to manage the constraints with which we work. And one of the things that I thought was fascinating about your presentation, which maybe you could I'm curious about, is this is like something that's so heartbreaking. It's another conversation I had with someone at the national convention this past weekend. He comes up and he says, I'm from this small school and I'm a strength coach and I want to do some of this stuff, but I don't have enough people with me. And I'm like, okay. And he's like, so how do I do it? Like, I got 4 teams to be a strength coach for. Like, how am I going to do all this stuff and print reports and do that stuff? And I'm like, well, I'll tell you what, I'll give you some advice. And this is what I tell every person from a university that comes and visits me and says that. Have you ever walked across campus? Have you ever got out of the gym and walked into the math department or to the computer science department or the psychology department or the biomedical engineering department? You have an amazing opportunity to identify students who are probably so excited to work with athletics that you could go and get a computer science kid right now who'd be like, wait, you want me to build you a database for this stuff? Yeah, I'll do that. That's a weekend project. And it's amazing what you could get if you leverage it properly. So I was curious for you guys, you're at a larger school. University of Louisville isn't small by any means, but obviously we all have budgetary constraints that we have to work under. Like, I don't know what it's like, I guess, working with one team. You guys have, I don't know how many varsity sports you have there. How do you prioritize who gets paid attention to, who gets which project? What's the pecking order? Like, well, how do you manage that? Don't all jump at once.
I'm going to defer to my superior here, the associate AD for health and performance, to kick this one off.
It's not, Ernie, that's not playing fair here. We're just, come on. All right, here we go. Great question. I think so athletics is its own silo, especially on many college campuses. And some are that way for survival. Some are that way because whoever is running the department, that's the way they want. And it makes it really hard to go get help because you find yourself trying to do it all yourself, and delegating isn't an option because that's not the culture. So you have to understand the culture that you're in and then the constraints that you're going to have to deal with. We don't have those constraints, so we have the ability to reach out on campus. At one point, we presented in front of all of the deans of every school at the university and let them know what we were doing and what we were planning on and how we could collaborate with them. And several of them reached out and said, yes, we would love to. Our students need opportunities, because we didn't look just at exercise physiology or sports science. We looked at the business school, the law school, several other schools, and let them know that we believe that there were valuable opportunities for us to collaborate. Because in athletics, you have business, you have tickets, you have compliance, you have law, you have NIL, you have facilities, you have every type of engineering, civil, mechanical, electrical, running. It's in an athletics department. And so if you can think outside the box, then you can use your imagination. And I think that's what we've been able to do, is use our imagination to form some partnerships and build some collaborations that are pretty unique, but we don't want them to be that way. We're trying to help others to see that, hey, go ahead and make some phone calls, send some emails on campus and see what happens. We present it to the provost. So it doesn't stop even to the president's office what we want to accomplish. And we've received a lot of support. So what do you think, Ernie?
Yeah, I think that was a great start to answering the question. And another part of that question that Patrick asked about was just like how you prioritize. And that's tough.
I don't do it. We have a director of sports science, and I just let that person get thrown under the bus, and just, if you survive, then you survive. That's what it is. That's what I do. I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting though, because one of the things that I do is what I call the sports science needs analysis, and it kind of never stops. You're constantly trying to give face time to coaches, health and performance staff, just to hear what they're talking about, and then through that process, trying to understand the needs that we have, and then you start to funnel those into more global constructs. So think of something like a listening version of a like principal components analysis or something, right? You're trying to identify like, what is all the information that's coming in from people? And then what are the constructs that seem to stand out across areas? So sometimes, when you go to a specific sport, they have a priority, and that priority is similar to the priorities you're hearing from a lot of other sports. And so for me, when it comes to prioritization, I'm constantly looking for the biggest rocks that we can try to put into place that have the greatest impact. Now, to do that though, it's not always as simple as it may sound, because there are, like Dr. Ivey said, there's certain cultural aspects and biases to that. There's resource limitations that we have to overcome. There's person power issues, potentially equipment, facilities, all kinds of other maybe ecological issues that we have to go through. And so you kind of have these things that we're concerned about, these constructs that we have our sights on, but the stars have to line up in a way to be able to address them. And so sometimes the stars line up to allow you to go and address this priority. It may not be at the top of the list, which is why in my mind, it's kind of good to have like maybe your top 5 or your top 10, and then allow the collaboration process and just, you know, the situation at hand within your organization, beyond your own walls, allow that to play out and be agile to take advantage of opportunities when you see them so that you can address different issues. And sometimes what that looks like is that might look like to a basketball team or a baseball team or a football team or even, you know, a volleyball team. It may look like, yeah, they're not meeting our needs. Like, no, we are, but like in a way that we're meeting a lot of different teams' needs simultaneously. So on the big picture, that's the approach. And then sometimes at a more microscopic level, a coach is very specific and says, hey, this is one thing I'd like to do. Then all of a sudden, maybe an intern applies and you talk to the intern, they're like, I really want to do this. And you're like, oh, hey, well, I'm going to marry you up with this project with this coach. How's that sound? They're like, yes. It's like, go. And then sometimes then the coach is like, yeah, like it was awesome having a person here all year working on this thing that's important to us. That's very, very specific to them. So sometimes you run into that too. But like Dr. Ivey said, it's hard to prioritize when you can prioritize things, but if you don't have all the pieces in place, if those stars don't line up to be able to address it, well, have fun prioritizing, because that's about all you're going to do.
Yeah.
Right. Everything has to line up to be able to address things. I want to pitch this over to Ted a little bit, because he's been just listening quietly, and I know he's ready to release the Kraken. So I want to go back to what you said in the very beginning, Patrick, and that was that you're just like a week out from the start of practice and going into a new football season. And I know, Dr. Ted, you interact with a lot of different NFL teams. But when we talk about priorities and you're interacting with all these different teams, like what are the priorities that teams have through your interactions that you would say, like right now, at this point, going into a new training camp across the NFL?
Probably praying that their players did something productive the last 5 weeks. Wouldn't you say that's right, Patrick?
That's bang on. I was just, that's what I was, when he was asking that question, I was like, it's probably that, did the guys do enough when they were here? Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's tough managing, you know, relative to the collective bargaining agreement. And I think, you know, what you have going on in Seattle, I think you're real smart with in terms of how you progress during camp. And really those first 2 weeks are crucial in terms of, you know, workloads and installs. And I think sometimes you have coaches that say, well, we've always installed this much, you know, in week 1. And so I think it's a balancing act. And, but I think the key is, you know, I think having you as a resource there with Coach Carroll's experience, probably just a great combination to iron out that situation a lot of teams aren't prepared for.
Are you on the road right now? Like visiting teams or?
I'm visiting a few college teams this week.
Okay, so college camps have opened. Did Louisville open already? Is that? Yeah.
It's just summer training right now, correct? Yeah, it's just summer training.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Not camp yet.
No.
So they don't have to worry about those 5 weeks.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. Okay, got it. Yeah.
I have a question
And
for you, Patrick.
Patrick, I might go ahead.
Well, I was scrolling through your social media and noticed that you do play the acoustic guitar. My question is not about that,
Oh yeah.
but about the applied versus non-applied sports scientists. I know we're working with some very young, some interns and some young people in our profession, and they are starting to get very interested in sports science, but they may not know the difference. They may think of it with a white lab coat, and you're sitting behind a computer all day, and
Yeah.
you're looking at a video of someone doing some sprint analysis or something like that. So what is the difference between the two?
So the non-applied scientist was sort of my tongue in cheek, poking fun at the sports technologist type of thing that people probably think I do, or think that Ernie does. If you think about the research continuum, you have basic science on one side, which is very similar to what you described as generally what people think of when they think of science, is like a person in a lab solving theoretical problems. So perhaps in another life, that would have been me, or another decade ago, that would have been me in a research lab doing, very specific tests. It might have been Ernie at US Ski and Snowboard, trying to study physiological demands of skiers, things like that. Very theoretical. We're trying to control some of the environment in order to say something substantive about whatever question it is we're trying to answer. On the flip side is the applied scientist, who's like right in the field with the practitioners. They're trying to solve the real world problems. For us, that would be the sports scientists with the coaches and with the medical staffs and strength staffs and the nutrition staffs and the psychologists. But applied would be like anything, like economists are really applied scientists, people that are evaluating social sciences, even like biologists or ecologists who are out in the field collecting, samples at different creeks and rivers and exploring those kinds of things. And so most of the time, in my head, and I could be wrong, but in my head, I think of that, like the applied scientist as the person in that environment attempting to scientifically answer questions, using philosophy of science. But most people think of or hire their applied scientist, and it's a sports technologist who turns on the GPS and turns on the force plate and prints the report. So oftentimes when I go and meet teams, they're like, "Oh, this guy, he does what you do. He's our applied scientist." I'm like, "Oh, cool. Like, what kind of things do you do?" And they're like, "Oh, I just, I throw on the GPS and then I print the report." And I'm like, "Oh, well, that's not really what I do." So I'm like, crap, so I'm like, well, if you're doing the applied science, if this is what people call applied science, who's the non-applied scientist? I want to talk to that person, because maybe they're the one doing the work that nobody wants to do, like rolling up their sleeves and writing methodology, or maybe like in your guys' situation in working with academic departments, rolling up your sleeves and writing grants or helping to write grants and secure funding and doing those things. Like maybe that's the person I'd want to talk to. So it's kind of like my tongue in cheek sort of approach at saying like, well, if in the United States, we call the applied sports scientist the person that handles the technology, I just want to meet the non-applied sports scientist, because maybe they're doing the interesting things that I'd be curious about. So that's kind of like my, sort of jab, my subtle jab, not so subtle jab.
I love it. That's awesome.
We're among friends here in all the audience.
Right on. And I mean, these things ebb and flow. I mean, Ted, you've been traveling for a long time, seeing lots of different team sports across the years. Like, how has it, making these trips around the country, maybe around the world sometimes, how have things changed in your eyes? I guess in particular, since we were talking about training camp starting, to American football, like really a decade ago, when I started in the league, I was one of maybe two kind of sports science analyst folk in the league. Like, how have things changed in your eyes?
Well, I think your comment you just made holds true of the applied, non-applied sports science. That still exists, very much so. I think what's changed is some of the acceptance of the head coaches, of somebody that's in your position that has the ability to communicate with the head coach, versus, well, this is what the report says. Is that how do you communicate the data analysis in a way that the coach is really comfortable with it? And I think that's still lacking a bit. And as that improves, I think you'll see, more acceptance of the information that you have to give to the coaching staff. And yeah, I think it's made improvements, but I think there's still a ways to go.
Yeah.
I got a question for you is with regard to, say, opponent or personnel analysis. In talking to a lot of baseball people that are in analytics, and obviously I think a lot of the data points they have are much greater than football. But the one thing I've noticed talking to the guys that are head of analytics is they literally assume the player has no head. I mean, it's all performance-based metrics. And sometimes you go, well, you sign that guy, your locker room's going to change. And it may not be for the good. So in terms of presenting, personnel or opposition information, how do you merge performance and, say, personality cognitive factors, into that analysis?
Well, we don't really know the personality cognitive factors necessarily of the opponent. I mean, baseball is interesting. Yeah, they get a lot of data, but if you think about baseball, it's a one-on-one zero-sum duel nested within a team sport. It's really a pitcher versus a batter until the ball's in play, and then the pitcher crosses his fingers and hopes the guys in the field do what they're supposed to do. But it is really a zero-sum game. It's easier to get quantifiables on things like that. And in football, we have a few zero-sum type of events, like an offensive lineman going against a defensive lineman. You either beat the guy or you don't. You either prevent him from getting to the quarterback or you don't. A cornerback and a wide receiver, you either get your hand up there and defend the pass and knock it out, or you whiff and the guy gets a touchdown or a first down or something like that. So there are some zero-sum opportunities. But effectively, like, the other thing with football that's maybe different than baseball, and this is where you start to get into the idea of matchups, is like there are players that you can, even though those events are zero-sum, we can effectively remove some run from the game. Now they change the way that the opponent plays. So the best example I could give you of that is, Richard Sherman comes into the league his rookie year. He was a lower draft pick. So he gets targeted, like 87 times in the passing game by the opponent offense, which is right around average for a cornerback. And he has a great season, smashes. Next season, they come back and people say, okay, maybe he just had a lucky rookie year. They go at him another, 75, 80 times, and he crushes. So now everybody's like, yeah, we don't want to do that. So he gets targeted the next season, like 47, it's like half of what because they're just like, now he has less zero-sum matchups, which, okay, that's fine. He's affecting the game, and it's how do you credit him for affecting the game? Because effectively, if you're playing cover 3, the quarterback head says only 2/3 of the field are open. We are not going to, I'm not even looking over there. And because he's over there, like their matchup idea is, well, just, put our worst receiver over there then. We'll have the best guy over here. And same thing, like, Pat played defensive line. Like, if he's a great pass rusher, I can move him. I can play him against their weaker left tackle, or maybe I play him against their stronger left tackle and let my weaker defensive lineman try and have more opportunities, right? So you're looking for those kinds of zero-sum opportunities. And that's where, like, baseball and football are a little different. The other tricky thing with football is it's a weak link sport. Like, you could have the best quarterback, but if you don't have a great offensive lineman, he doesn't have time to do anything, except for maybe, someone who can process super fast, like Brady or Manning. And they're just like, yeah, fine. Not a great offensive line this year, but I will get the ball out faster than anyone's ever seen me. I will go through reads faster than anyone ever. Most of the time, that's going to, if that's the weak link, that's going to be a problem. You could have a great defensive line, but if the secondary isn't great, that's the weak link. Teams can take advantage of that. So that makes it a little different as opposed to something like basketball, where, if you had LeBron in your day and you're down by 20 at the half, he's walking out of the tunnel going, don't worry, I'm taking this game over and I'm dropping 55 points on these guys right now. And it's just going to happen. And there's there's nothing you can do about it. So that makes football really unique and different when you're thinking about matchups and opponents. Is there's all of these things that sort of play into it. And it's also they're professional coaches on the other sideline too. Like they're watching film as also. So it's one of those, like, I know that that I know that what we're going to do, but kind of things where you're like, oh, what's going to happen? And yeah, it's like, it's a really unique sport in that way. Yeah.
How much do you enjoy looking at tendencies, and how do you communicate those tendencies when you're looking at an opponent on video?
Yeah. So I have on our staff, we have two guys that are very focused on like opponent advance. They're way smarter football guys than I am. Like if we watch plays, they'll pick up everything and I'll pick up like 10% of what they pick up. So they're like really good at like piecing all that stuff together. The best thing that I can do, and one of our other analysts can do, is try and support those guys in, hey, we need help. Like, how would we statistically look at this? How would we put this together? And one of the ways that we can help with that and support that is building web apps and things that allow the end user to get that information faster and quicker, and allow them to get what they need. Additionally, we never give reports when we're doing opponent stuff to the coaches without a video cut up. So, because we want them to watch it. So we're going to say, like, this is what we think based on our analysis. And they can watch it and they might say like, oh yeah, but that's happening because of these three things that you're not accounting for. And it's like, oh, wow. Yeah, we could probably account for that. And, those kinds of things. So we always try and provide video because that's the sort of currency, that's the currency that the coaches speak, and they're going to live in that video. And some of the things is getting them that video faster. So there's things that they'll do, especially if you're like a young quality control coach, where you're going to spend hours on end going through, 600, 700, 800, 1,000 plays to find the 150 that you need for the cut up to teach the players on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And if we can sit with those guys and be like, hey, walk me through what you're looking for and how you watch this. Sometimes that's just like, oh, we can write like a SQL query on the back end to knock this out and get you down to like 200 plays. And then you only got to find 100 of those, the 100 in that. And so we can, sometimes it's not about building new and novel and complex analysis and opening more doors. Sometimes, like, if we have 100 doors, we can close some doors. And that is actually more impactful than trying to do something like super complex. But it is kind of cool, I guess, as like an ex-player, I think we have some players now that have retired and then come back to coach. And like one of our defensive cornerbacks, his first year coaching here, coming back, he was a quality control coach. He was 1 year removed from retirement, and he sits down in the opponent advance in training camp, and sits down, and our defensive coordinator goes, the guys are going to go through the opponent. This is what we got, blah, blah, blah. And we go through our spiel, and then we leave. And like 45 minutes later, he comes down to my office and he's like, yo, Peter. I'm like, yeah. He's like, did you do that when I played? I'm like, yeah. He's like, holy crap. I wish I had that information for myself when I played. That would have been amazing to see. Like, it was like something that he was like, I never knew we had all this. Like, it was just, because we do it for the coaches, and then they, that's how it works. They go to their position rooms and they talk them through it. So sometimes it's kind of funny just to hear the players like come back and get exposed to the things that they never knew were sort of going on. Like, wow, I didn't know y'all were doing this. Like, it's kind of fun.
That is cool. That is cool. I think educating athletes, sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. But I think when you have an athlete that can process that information and it helps them, you create a special situation. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. Like, Coach's philosophy. Have you ever read his book, Win Forever? It pretty much everything in that book is like the week that we live. Like this is how we do it. And one of his big mantras is learn your learner. And, not every guy is going to learn a certain way. And I'll never forget this story that when Coach Cable was here as our offensive line coach, he told me, because I used to sit with him and I'd go over like all of his offensive linemen and what training looked like that week. And we're talking about teaching, and he was always a great teacher. He was a special ed teacher before he was a football coach. And he was telling me the story about, he said, a couple of years ago, I got this kid from another team, this offensive lineman, and he's like, the offensive line coach at the other team brings me up, and I've gotten this guy for 2 days at practice, and he said, hey, Tom, has the guy asked you the question yet? And he's like, what are you talking about? He's like, okay, don't worry. He's like, he's going to ask you a question in the next 5 days. And it's going to be up to you to decide what you do with that question, but he's going to ask it. He's like, well, what is it? He's like, I can't tell you. You'll find out, but it's totally up to you. And different coaches have handled it different ways. So he's like, one day I'm sitting there and I'm coaching in our offensive line meeting. And I've noticed he's not writing anything down. He's just sitting and he's watching film, and I'm talking, and like other guys are taking notes. And it ends, and I'm kind of cleaning up, and all the players leave, and I turn around and he's just sitting there, and I'm thinking like, okay, here comes the question, And the guy says, hey, coach, like, thanks for today's class, whatever. He's like, I don't really learn well like this. Like, I have to do it. And he's like, okay, so how can I help you? He's like, well, if we set up the desks to look like the defensive line, and you take me through the plays and show me exactly what you want me to do, I'll do it. So he's like, dude, every Wednesday and Thursday night, I'd stay here till 11 o'clock at night with that guy, just with desks. And we'd go over it. We'd watch the video and he'd pick it up. And he's like, but the thing is, like, he said, honestly, when we got to game day, he was the best offensive lineman I had. I always could trust him. He's like, he couldn't learn the same way everybody else did. But if I found the way that he learned, I was able to make this huge impact on his ability to perform when it mattered. And it was a pretty cool story, and that's it. Learn your learner. We've done reports. Like we had a coach where we do these reports, and we're 3 weeks in, and he goes, I got to stop you for a second. You're telling me there's blue and green on this report? I'm like, yeah. He's like, I'm colorblind. I'm like, holy crap. Why didn't you tell me that? We could use colorblind, we could use like colorblind agnostic colors, like palettes. Like these are solvable problems. Like if you just let us know. Sometimes people are embarrassed to say things, but learning your learner is a big part of it. I know, like when I started in sport, people would say, you got to have lots of, you have to have a great dashboard and it's got to be cool and stuff. And like the first graph I took to Pete, he was just like, never bring me this again. Just bullet points and a table of numbers. And that's it. Like he doesn't want to see, now and then, but some of our scouts, like they want to see like a web page that they can interact with and drag things and drop things. And, different people need different things. And to Ernie's points, sports science is about asking questions and having a process to answer those questions. And it's about the technology, and it's about the reporting. And that reporting piece is really important because you have to know how to report to the people that are going to use it. And you have to put it into, terms that are on their turf, not your turf. Not everybody wants to read scientific literature.
Yeah, I was talking to one applied sports scientist who does a great job. He's at a Big Ten school, and he said he's to the point now where all he has to do is share a very quick text with the head coach, and that's his report, because they're to the point. That's how they can communicate, and he knows exactly what that text will mean, and he goes, it's fantastic.
I think, that's it. Like some of the guys just need, Dave, who was here, who's now the OC at Tampa Bay. Canales, it was great. He was here as our wide receivers coach and then our quarterbacks coach. And like with Dave, like he'd be like, I don't need all the bells and whistles, like literally come in when he was coaching wide receivers. He'd be like, tell me the guys that I need to be concerned about and what you want me to do at practice tomorrow, and I'll do it. That's all I need to know. Just like, tell me what you want me to do and I'll do it. Okay. You're saying this guy, 20% less reps, perfect. And you're saying that this guy can take those reps. Got it. I'll write it down. The assistant coach will manage it. That's all I need to, he didn't want he didn't need the elaborate presentation. He didn't need to figure out how he arrived at the conclusion. That's what he wanted. Some guys want to, we have some scouts that they want to see like every model, and we'll sit down and we'll watch film and they'll say, okay, you said this guy had an expected yards of rushing yards on this play of, 6.5. And he got 3. Let's see what happened. Oh, okay. Totally. The guard missed this and this happened. And I could see why he should have gotten that because there was a hole there, but then this happened. Okay, great. Next play. And that's, different people just need or want different things. And you have to figure out how to communicate to, across all different learning styles.
Now, Pat and Ernie, do you do anything with your sports coaches relative to trying identifying the learning styles of the athletes there at Louisville?
We have had some conversations about that, Ted, and some coaches are interested in that. You have to involve academics, the academic units when you do that, because we also have learning specialists inside of our academic units. And then potentially the mental health team gets involved as well, because if someone does have a learning disability and then they are prescribed meds, maybe they've had some meds before college or during college, and now you have the psychiatrist involved. So it's a bigger process because there's student athletes as well. But it is something I've seen some programs that do a really good job of that. And it takes buy-in from the head coach to the person who's running academics, the health and performance staff, the psychiatrist, the team physician as well needs to sign off on it. So it's a lot of moving parts, but when you can figure out if someone's more of a visual learner or auditory or kinesthetic, did I say that right? Yeah, it's you have to figure out what works for people better, but it takes a lot of effort to be able to set that system up. But once it's set up, I think I've seen it be very valuable. There's a school that I visited before, and they play checkers. They use a board inside of each position coach's office to teach how the movement of where players should be. And for some, they said they know this because they actually tested their players to find out what type of learner they were. And they had a quarterback at a previous school that would move pieces around on the board inside the assistant coach's office to learn plays. So I know it's being done. It's fantastic when it comes from the sport coaches when they know it's important, that can really drive that effort.
With that stuff, like with any of it, I mean, you just went through like several different departments that are supporting touch points with the athletes. You have medical, you have tutors and educational and psychologists and all of that stuff, high performance and strength coaches. And so one thing that I think about a lot right now, as the landscape of college athletics has changed and continues to change with NIL and the transfer portal as it is, how do you, or have you thought through processes of because in theory, and I don't know, to be fair, I don't know what the transfer portal is like for other sports, because we really only hear about it in the media on ESPN for college football. Those are the big names moving. But in theory, you could send a recruiter or a coach out to, some kid's house in Southern Ohio and playing at Xavier High School, spend all of this time and effort to recruit them to Louisville. They start practicing there. Now you're spending tons of resources in education and tutoring. You're feeding them, you're teaching them playbooks, you're spending time in the weight room with them and the medical staff. And they get 3 years in and they say, you know what? I can get more money down the road at, I don't know, UK or Tennessee or whatever. And they just peace out, and you've lost that massive investment. Like, I got to imagine there has to be some discussion with athletic directors around, like, what's the process for trying to retain, these athletes that we've invested all this time in. And if they can just get up and leave because they can get more money somewhere else, or because they're, maybe promised play time because there's not a senior or someone in front of them. How do you manage that? Or I don't even know.
I don't know. I don't know who knows. It's we're 2 years in, I believe, with the transfer portal, maybe a year into NIL. I don't think it's more than, I believe that timeline is right. It's so new. I don't think we really know. It still comes down to what type you still have to care about the athlete. You have to make sure you care about them as a person and as an athlete, because if you don't, they're going to transfer anyway. So I think you have to look, what are we doing the right thing? And you can't worry about things we can't control. I think that's been the position that from conversations that I've had with coaches, that's been their position is, let's do the right thing. And what happens. Let's make a really good environment, have a really good culture where people want to stay and they want to come here. So if they leave, we've got a good culture, that reputation is out there. We get other athletes that want to come here, and maybe there's a chance we can upgrade. What do you think, Ernie?
What I think versus what I hope. What I hope, I guess that's also what I think, is that I hope it'll change the collegiate athletics environment to some extent. In a way, right now, the collegiate athlete formerly was probably the most powerless in their sport organization. So they come in, if you transfer, you have to sit out for a year. So the NCAA institution, they have a lot of leverage on the athlete. And now the athlete can transfer out and go and play immediately. They're looking for NIL deals. So some of these athletes come in and in a way, like, they're very wealthy, and it changes the kind of the power orientation between the institution, the team, the coaches and the staff, and the athlete. And I hope that the relationship between the organization and the athlete changes, because, like, in Olympic sport, most of the time, the Olympic athlete doesn't have to work with you if they don't want to. I presume to some extent that's true, at least from a health and performance standpoint, like in the NFL. Those athletes can do their own thing that they want to, or they could take advantage of the resources that you have to offer them when they're away and everything. And so what I'm hopeful for is that the role changes. It now becomes a partnership between staff and each individual athlete, so that athlete knows, like, I want you to pick us. I want you to pick what I have to offer to make you as good as you can be. And if you're here for 6 months, a year, or 3 years, like, I promise that, like, you're here, you're the athlete in front of us. So let's have a partnership to get you to where you want to go every day that you're here. And that's what I'm hoping might start to evolve, because if it does, I think it'll be really interesting to see kind of how the culture of collegiate athletics shifts if we start moving in that direction. I've had the opportunity to work in Olympic sport, at least, and the relationship between you and the athletes is a lot different. And I found that to be really cool. So I'm hopeful that maybe collegiate athletics could shift in that direction. So I think that like I want to try to like ask one more question here, and we talked about learning the learners. We talked about communicating results and how you report information. And Patrick, you kind of alluded to what I would refer to as innovation. So innovation isn't just novel, new, shiny. Sometimes it's just improving a process, like helping that quality control person go from 1,000 clips to 200 to be able to choose 100. But to maybe tie this up and wrap it with a bow, Dr. Ivey said at the beginning of the podcast, like we're trying to share with others what we're doing at our organization. And Patrick, I've noticed that you've done that too. Like you put a lot of really cool stuff out there, and you're trying to like share with people tools and information. You're trying to educate other learners, and kind of just an open public forum. So maybe you can just give back to the industry that's helped you be where you are. So maybe just talk a little bit about like your view on like freely sharing your knowledge with the industry, and why you think that is so important, as opposed to saying, I'm Patrick Ward, Dr. Patrick Ward. I work for the Seahawks. I know something, and I have these skills that are that allow me to be in my position, and I'm going to keep that close to vest. Like, why have you chosen, and why is it important for you to so freely share, like, with the industry to help the industry evolve and try to grow?
I think, yeah, like I always say, never underestimate the power of doing work in the public space, whether that's like free on Twitter or blogs or GitHub, or whether that's free and whether that's open science frameworks, which I've published a bit about. When I started in this field, I didn't come the conventional route of most people, which would be like, you go to college, you do a grad assistant program, you intern with someone, you work really hard in that internship in the hopes that they plug you into their pipeline. They know someone at a different university who's looking for a coach to sign on and things like that. I didn't do that. I just kind of went about it as like, well, I'm just going to kind of do my own. I think of it as a blessing and a curse. One, it's the curse because I didn't have someone to help plug me in. But it was the blessing because I also didn't have someone telling me, don't do that. This is how we do things here. And sometimes when you're a grad assistant or even doing your PhD as a research assistant, sometimes you're smacked on the hand a few times and you're told, do it this way. So because of that, I was always trying to find opportunities to meet with people since I wasn't into anyone's network. And so I would send out tons of emails living in Phoenix to strength coaches. Oh, you're coming in town. I'd love to meet for coffee. And very few people would ever get back to me. So my thought process from there was, well, what if I just, blogs started to become popular around 2006. And I was like, what if I just start putting my ideas out there? And there was two reasons really why I wanted to do it. One was, if I start putting my ideas out there, maybe it'll give people an opportunity to like interact and talk with me. And then two, if I'm totally wrong, the internet is a really honest place and people are going to tell me that I'm wrong and they're going to hate it. So I was like, well, let me get feedback also. So that's what I started doing. And I made it a goal. I said, I'm going to try and do a research review twice a week. I'll read a paper and I'll write up like a short review. Like, what is this? What is this? Was it a decent study? Like, what are the limitations, assumptions? Like, how can we use it? And so I would knock out 2 a week. And my friends were like, you're crazy. This is a waste of time. This is stupid. And after 2-3 years, someone at Nike called and said, hey, some of our researchers in our lab read your blog. Like, do you want to come up and interview for a position? It's like, yeah, that's cool. And that's how I got there. And so once I got there, it didn't stop. Like, I was like, public space work is so important and maybe others can learn from this. And whenever, knowing what it was like when I was the young student trying to email all these people, I always try, I get back to every student. So if a student emails me, I will reply, I will call you back, I will give you a 20-minute conversation. And the one thing I always tell them, the two things I always tell them, I tell them, one, public space work is so important. Like if you don't have a GitHub page, if you don't have LinkedIn, if you don't have Twitter, if you don't, open it, share it. Like there is so much free data out there that you can get, and you can do anything, even if it's something that someone's already done. And even if you think it's stupid, put it out there and keep putting stuff out there, because people will talk to you. That's the first. And the second is, if you're going to reach out to people, reaching out to me is fine. Cause like I said, I'll return your call or your email, but maybe someone else around the league wouldn't. But here's the kicker: the students that send me the email that said, instead of saying, I'm about to graduate, I'd love to talk to you about your path and how you got into this. Do you have any time? I say, sure. Those are fine. But the best emails are the ones that say, Ernie, I'm really interested in what you do. And I've been working on this project where I built some of my own accelerometers. I've attached a PDF of my methodology. I was wondering if you might have some time to chat and give me some feedback on it. The kids who send in emails that are like, I've been working on this analysis of the passing game. Like, would you be able to give me some feedback? I'm like, yep. What are you doing right now? Let's go. I want to hear about this. That's super huge. Like being able to, one, do stuff in the public space where people will talk to you and start to bring you into their, kind of into their conversation, be a part of the social cocktail, the social media cocktail hour. Two, it gives you a portfolio of things to share when you do have to go on a job interview and someone says, hey, bring some code, bring some analysis, bring a presentation of how you might use this stuff. And then three, in reality, once you get to a certain point, it's not for anyone else except you. Like people are like, wow, you give out all this code for free. You have all these, like your GitHub page is just like how to code Bayesian models, how to code simulations. I'm like, yeah. They're like, that's amazing. I'm like, yeah, I'm glad you enjoy it. It's really there because sometimes I'm sitting at work and I'm like, damn it. How did I do that one time? And then I could just go to my own GitHub page and get it, but I just keep it free for everybody else because they might be sitting there thinking, gosh, how could I do this? And so to me, the public space work is so important. And I think that the greatest part about it is just like getting the emails or the phone calls or meeting people at conferences who say, man, like what your blog and the screencast that you do every week it's helped me so much in terms of just like what I've been able to do with my work, or it helped me get a promotion, or it helped me get a job. I mean, we had one guy who's an Amazon engineer who told us, I took all the code. I watched one of your screencasts. I took all the code from it and I rewrote it with the data set that they had given me for a job interview. And I got this job. We're like, that's so cool. Like, that's awesome. Great. Good for you, So I think, yeah, public space work, it's a great way to get in touch with people. It's a great way to start a conversation with people that might otherwise not talk to you. And it's a great way to retain the resources for your own work once you're sitting there at your desk sometimes and you forget what the heck you were supposed to do. So, yeah.
Well, Patrick, your sharing is such an admirable trait. And to wrap this up, what books, it could be on a variety, any particular topic, would you recommend for our listeners?
I really so I'm reading a book now called The Data Detective. I think it's just a nice little read. There's lots of stories in there that people have heard a million times. The author is a science journalist, and he gives his sort of 10 axioms for evaluating a claim before he writes an article about it. I think it's just a great little read. David Spiegelhalter is at Oxford. He's a statistician, and his entire kind of work with the UK government is ways about communicating risk. And he wrote this book for the lay public called The Art of Statistics. And it's just a great read for practitioners. It's in common language. It's not complicated. He does give free coding scripts and stuff like that. So I think that's an awesome one. If you want to get into something, another great kind of read is Signal and Noise by Nate Silver. I think that's a fun one just in terms of thinking probabilistically about the world. And if you want to get into something more technical, I'd say Regression and Other Stories by Gelman and colleagues. That is it's just a brilliant text that takes you everything from like the basics of probability all the way through to building regression models, and then finally like causal inference models. And it does so without, I mean, he's just a brilliant teacher. And so it does so without a lot of complex Greek letters. It does so by teaching you how to apply it with code. And so he just explains it well. And it's just a really, really great book. I'd say those are some cool books to check out.
Oh, thank you.
Well, Patrick, this hour flew by. Thank you so much. Appreciate you. Looking forward to more social media posts that get us communicating more with each other. So thank you for that and all of your contributions. So take care.
Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate it. Enjoyed it.
Great job.
Thanks, Dr. Patrick.